If I could only read one genre for the rest of my life, it would probably be fantasy. Even though it's never my like most read genre, I'm a romance girly. I love these books more than other books, and I'm particularly a series girl. I love to spend books and books with a character. I love developing those sort of relationships with characters and really deeply understanding them. And these books range, they're all sorts of fantasy. Some of them are like classic romantasy books. Some of them are more like traditional like boy fantasy. There's one of those actually. And some of them are contemporary fantasy. We have a mix. They definitely lean a little bit more on like the feminine side of the fantasy genre. Okay, and I know I said 10. The title is my top 10 favorite fantasy books, but I couldn't actually just pick 10. And so I actually have 4 honorable mentions that I'm going to go through super quickly before I get into my top 10. These 4 are not ranked. The rest will be ranked. My first recommendation is Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. The only reason this isn't in my top 10 is because I've actually only read the first book. I've only read Daughter of No Worlds. I haven't continued the series, which like, I don't know why. I really enjoyed the first book. It's one of the few books that has actually given me like a little bit of the magic of Selena Sarthothian, who is like my deeply beloved. It follows this young woman who is enslaved and she's able to get out of slavery, and then she goes to this new country, this new land in which she's like learning how to train her magic because she wants to return to like the country she was enslaved in and help free the people that are still trapped in this system. And of course, she develops a little romance with the guy that's training her. It is like perfection. I really love Carissa Broadbent. We will see her again later in this list. And I like truly do plan to continue the series, and I think it has the potential to also move up once I've read more of it. The next recommendation is like a completely different speed, and that is the Bonds That Tie series by Jay Breeze. This series is super spicy. It is a like why choose reverse harem style book in which our main girly has 4 or 5, I can't remember, boys. Okay, in this world, it's kind of like a dystopian world, and they're like college age. They're pretty young. This girl is, I don't remember the names of these things, but she is kind of like the power source, and then all of her boys have like different magic powers, but they can only use their magic if they're sleeping together. So they all need to be sleeping together in order for their magic to work, and there's these like bad guys that are after them. Is the world building in this particularly complex? No, the bad guys are bad for no particular reason, just because they're like evil, okay? Please don't ask questions. But it was so addictive. I read the entire series in a single week. They are like quick reads. They are like spicy and like simple, and they're fun. And sometimes a fun time is what I'm looking for. Next is the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle Jensen. I loved the premise of this series. I read the initial duology in like a single day, and I know the series has continued. I don't have a ton of interest in continuing. The original duology followed like a specific couple, and now I think we're talking about someone else, and I don't care. But I loved the original duology. We're following this princess who's been essentially trained as like a spy and assassin her entire life because she is marrying into this rival kingdom, the like Bridge Kingdom, which like the bridge setup is so interesting. We have like 2 main land blocks, and there's like a bridge that unites them, hence the Bridge Kingdom, and they live in the Bridge Kingdom, like they live in the bridge. It's really fun because she's been sent to like kill him, but she starts to fall in love with him as they're married. It is really good. It is very quick. Again, my biggest complaint about this was I felt like I didn't have enough time in the world because it is such like a quick duology. I really wanted to have more of expansive understanding of the world, and you don't in these initial books. Like I said, I've only read the first 2, so maybe you do later, but that would be my big complaint, is it's like a pretty self-contained, smallish understanding of the world in this initial duology. And then my final honorable mention is the Schoolmance series by Naomi Novik. Again, a series I have not quite finished. I've only read the first 2 books. They're really enjoyable. The premise is super fun. It is about this magical school, which sometimes you just have a hankering for a magical school, in which all of these young magic people, I don't know if they're called witches and wizards in this situation. I have a feeling they were not. But they are sent to this school because when they are young adults and their magic starts to come into fruition, it actually attracts monsters. And so they put them all in this one place so the monsters will all flock there. But like the school is like fairly secure. but like monsters get in all the time, but not the big ones, the little ones. And so they're like constantly under attack of like monsters of getting them. The world building is like really interesting. I feel like the structure is fun and unique, and I really liked it. I like really liked the world. I do plan on finishing the series. I just haven't gotten around to the third book. Okay, on to our top 10. Are you ready? Okay. In 10th place, we have Legendborn, which is a modern day retelling of the like Knights of the Round Table King Arthur legend that follows Bree Matthews, this young woman who enrolls in an early college program. This is YA, but it's like very upper YA. And she does so after the death of her mother. And so we're really dealing with a lot of grief. And then she like finds out about the secret like Arthurian society, and she realizes her mother is connected, and she learns more about the secret society and how it is connected to the history of this college, which is in the South. And Bree is a Black woman, and there is a lot of conversation around the history of this region of the country and enslaved people and how that relates to like the modern systems of power and wealth currently at the school as well. Really good. I've only read, again, the first book in the series. I read the first book when the other two hadn't come out yet, and now I think the third one just came out, and so I'm looking to read the second one so I can read the third one. And another book that takes place in a school, like honestly has like a similar premise, even though the vibes are completely different, and that is the Ninth House series by Leigh Bardugo. There are 2 books out now. I believe there are more coming. This is my favorite Leigh Bardugo, which I think is like not a popular opinion. Most people love Six of Crows, and I read and enjoyed Six of Crows, but it's not a book that has stuck with me. Ninth House I think about like regularly, where Ninth House follows Alex Stern, this young woman who's kind of had like a rough life growing up. We don't know a ton about her initially. We learn more through the course of the book, but she gets this opportunity to go to Yale, which like she is pretty much in no way qualified for. She really did not have access to like the level of education that you would expect to go to be a student who would be successful at Yale. And she gets this opportunity because she can see ghosts. And so she is working at Yale essentially as this like overseer of all the secret societies of Yale, because in this book, the secret societies of Yale are actually doing magic, and they're doing like really dark sorts of magic. And so Alex is there to kind of like keep an eye on them. It is really interesting. I think it has some incredible conversations around like class and academia and like institutional power. And I just think the world that Leigh Bardugo was able to create in these books is fantastic. I'm hoping that Calabasas, the new R.F. Kuang book that's coming out later this year, has like a similar sort of energy. I'm sure it'll be like an R.F. Kuang sort of spin, but I love Babel by R.F. Kuang, and I also love Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I'm just like hopeful Calabasas is in that same vein. In 8th place, we have Serpent and the Wings of Night, which is the Crowns of Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent. I actually did a recap of the initial duology in the series. This is going to be a series of interconnected duologies. It takes place in this vampire world in which vampires have pretty much taken over everything. They like rule the regions, at least we're in, but we're following a human girl named Aurea who has been adopted by this like vampire king. And so she's grown up her whole life in the palace, even though she's like a human girl who is like constantly in danger. And she winds up entering this competition called the Kajari. It is this like magical competition in which the winner gets a wish from the goddess Nyaxia, and she is like entering this competition in order to get a wish that will help like make sure she can survive in this land where it's really hard to be a human. But of course, as she enters, she befriends this vampire man, and then a romance develops. There's a lot of actual like political conversations. I really love the way Carissa plays with ideas of like good and evil and family and friendship in these books. I feel like the secondary characters and the relationships between our main characters and our secondary characters is really the strong point of this book and like my favorite part of the series. I'm not going to go too much into detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but I do feel like it has a really strong secondary relationships and a really great complex understanding of the villains, which is my favorite. If you want to make it to my top favorite fantasy series, your villains better be complex. Probably. I'm sure I will eat my words at that because some of these probably are less complex than others. I think our one boy on the list, welcome. And that's The Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. classic. I don't think you could exist in the world of fantasy and not have read this. For my romantasy girlies who have like come in via like Fourth Wing and Sarah J. Maas, I want to say I think this book sometimes can feel like a little intimidating in terms of there are like a ton of characters you're following and it's like a very complex political scheme. But I feel like George R.R. Martin is actually incredibly skilled at making sure you, for the most part, have like a good understanding of who's who and like what the dynamics are within the larger political structure of this kingdom. We're essentially following an entire kingdom, which has like a lot of different regions in it, as they different noble families and other people fight for the throne. The characters are so fascinating, and even like the bad guys are so complex and interesting. My favorite characters are some of the villains. I also would highly recommend the audiobook. If you do audiobooks at all, I don't do a ton of audiobooks for fiction, but like the Game of Thrones audiobooks are fantastic. I love the narrator so much, would highly recommend. I, again, am not finished with this series. I am stuck. I'm stuck on A Feast for Crows. I like can't get through it. I'm like 50% of the way through and just have been at 50% for like probably a year at this point. There's also the fact that there will be no end to this series. I don't think George R.R. Martin is ever going to finish it. Like, there's supposed to be 2 more books that come out in the series, and it's been like a while since he's released a book. And I know he's working on it. But like, will we be able to get both of them? I don't know. But I still think it's worth it. I feel like it's a series in which they're like constantly vying for the throne. And so like, while maybe he's dreamt up like a conclusive ending, I feel like we're left with kind of like a lot of satisfying arcs. So it's not like, I don't know, again, I haven't finished the series, so maybe we're left on like a huge cliffhanger, but from what I've read so far, it's like more of a journey based book than the conclusion. You know, I think it's still worth the read even if there's not an ending. Next, we have the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, and I would also add to this the companion series, The Stolen Heir. I read that last year, maybe the year before, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. I loved it. Let's start with The Cruel Prince. The Cruel Prince follows this human girl named Jude, and Jude has like grown up since she was fairly young in the Fae world, and Holly Black's Fae and fairies are ruthless. They are mean and conniving and scheming, and so she's grown up around all these people, and she's like substantially weaker than the Fae around her. She has like a lot more limitations, but she also has some things that they do not have. So like the Fae in Holly Black's world cannot lie at all, but obviously Jude, being a human girl, can. And if you love a scheme, if you love scheming, Jude does it well. This is a book about scheming, and it is really fun. I think if you go into it expecting a romantasy, sometimes it will get pitched as like a romantasy. I think you're destined to be disappointed because the romance is definitely like a secondary plot. Like, it's there and it's a good time, but like our primary plot is more like political intrigue schemes. You know, emphasis on the schemes. Really good time. It is YA, but like I still really enjoyed it. I read it as an adult. In 5th place, we have our first Sarah J. Maas appearance, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses. This was one of my first introductions, particularly as an adult. I think I had read some fantasy, obviously, as a child, but as an adult into like true like second world fantasy. Like, there's a map in the front of the book, and I was like, I'm not a girl who likes a map in the front of the book. Like, that's just like a little too much for me. Then I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I didn't like the first book. And I read Court of Mist and Fury, and I didn't like that book either. I didn't like hate them, but I wasn't like, I didn't get the hype. And then I read A Court of Wings and Ruin, and I said, I get it. I'm here. I understand. I'm a fan. And that changed the course of my life. That's a little dramatic, but like from there I read Throne of Glass and Crescent City, and I've read all of Sarah J. Maas's work. ACOTAR, I think, is an entry point for a lot of people. It is definitely like the classic romantasy. Like, the romance really does fuel the plot. We're following Feyre, this young woman who winds up in the fairy world after she accidentally kills a fae beast. And the first book is like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So she's Belle and Tamlin is the beast, essentially. So you get the basic premise. And honestly, it's kind of boring for the first 2/3. But then something happens, and it really gets much more exciting. And as the series develops, it like continues to get more exciting. I think the 3rd book is masterfully done. I think it is just like truly stunning the way it all kind of like folds together. The initial trilogy is those first 3 books, and then from there, Sarah J. Maas, not tired of the world yet, has written a little novella, which I've never read. I've never read the Christmas novella, confession. I'm going to have to read it because I'm doing an ACOTAR recap, or I'm starting an ACOTAR recap, so I'm going to have to read the Christmas novella, but we'll get to it. And then A Court of Silver Flames, which follows one of Feyre's sisters. But like the original trilogy is the first 3 books, and I do think Wings and Ruin just like really masterfully ties together the whole series in a way that I just absolutely loved and I'm obsessed with. And it's a series that I've come back to multiple times and have reread. And I'm really excited to be starting a recap series, which should be starting in the next week or 2, depending on when this gets posted. And I'll be talking in so much depth about my thoughts about ACOTAR. But of course, not to make the list. Next on my list is a book that like I recommend with so many caveats, but like I truly love and could not exclude from this list. And that is the series From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This series has kind of like ballooned. Originally, I was told it was a trilogy. Then it was 5 books. And now, I don't know how many books we're at. I can't even count them. There's like a whole spin-off series. We're still releasing books in the original trilogy, but you like really do kind of have to read the spin-off series to understand the original. The mythology and what's happening in the world is just getting like a little messy, kind of giant. The last book was in the series, and I know I normally don't talk very negatively, and this is a series about books I love, but like I really didn't like the last book in the series. It was a book from the like main guy's perspective, and like it was just the first book from his perspective. It added very little. It was like boring. It was kind of boring, but it added enough different stuff that you kind of needed to read it, I think, to continue in the series and understand what was happening. And I felt a little manipulated into reading it because I didn't want to. Like, you can write a book from the boy's perspective. Like, I'm fine with that, but like, I shouldn't have to read it. Any series in which I'm being forced to read the male's perspective, I'm out. That's not for me. I'm here for the girlies. And I'm not talking about like an alternating perspective book, but like a book where like the first book came out from the girl's perspective. And now you want me to go back to the first book, but read it from the man's perspective? I don't want to. That's just like not my vibe. Anyway, so me and the series have some beef. But at the end of the day, nothing in the world, not a single other book that I've ever encountered releases dopamine in my brain like this series. The first 2 books particularly are just like giddy, delightful. I have such a fun time. They are spicier on the scale of things. I should probably tell you about them. We're following Poppy, this young woman who is the maiden. And we're like very unclear on what this status as a maiden means, except that she's incredibly isolated. She's like constantly veiled when she's outside of her room, and she really doesn't have a lot of interactions with anyone outside of like her maid, who is like her best friend. But then she gets this new guard named Hawk, and he is just like charming and cute and dashing and fantastic, and things spiral from there. It's also a vampire story. There are vampires afoot around, which I love a vampire tale. One thing about me, my brain was fundamentally formed as I read Twilight, and I think like there are 2 hands holding apples in my head that like really help me determine like what books I'm going to be obsessed with and which ones I'm going to be less okay with. Okay, we're in the top 3, which are like series that I like recommend wholeheartedly. I do recommend wholeheartedly. Also, if you don't like them, you don't have to tell me. That's okay. It does indeed hurt my feelings a little bit when someone is like, I hate your favorite books. When someone's like, your favorite book is bad, I'm like, whoa, I guess I'm just an idiot. I guess I'm the dumbest girl in the world. In third place, we have An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahira. This series is YA, but I think it is brilliantly done. I think it is exceptionally done. Honestly, like, if we were to objectively take my, like, emotional attachment out of it, this book probably should be top of the list. I think it is brilliant. I don't know if I've ever read another book who has done morally complex characters and villains better than this book. This book is a character study, but it's also, like, very action-packed. Like, I'm not saying that in that not a lot happens. A lot happens, but also we are following our like main characters, but also these like secondary characters. And like I said, even the villains, we are following in this way that you are like, what you're doing is not cool, but also I get you. And I think that is my favorite thing. I love a villain that I can understand the motivations of. The basic premise is we have this young woman who's like probably 17, because that's how old you are in YA books, and she has to like turn spy essentially to save her brother's life, and she winds up at this like military academy. she's like working as a slave in this like elite military academy that is working for like the empire and is like working directly against like her family and hers best interest. And then we're following her, and then we're also following a student at the same academy who is like beginning to question everything that he's like learned his entire life. And from there it like really spirals into this like much larger story, as fantasy novels tend to do, in which we're really exploring like the world and the dynamics between like the empire and these people that they've oppressed, and like the magic systems around them, and like the big evils within the magical world, but also within this empire. It is fantastic. It is a book I still think about. ACOTAR has not picked up this series, but she's continued this series, sort of. That's what I've heard. I haven't read it yet, but has like a second series that also takes place in this world and is connected deeply to the first quartet. I think it's 4 books. The first book, Air, just came out this past fall, and I'm so excited to read it. I've been like saving it because I know it's going to be so good. Everyone who's read it has like said it's brilliant, and I'm so excited. It is like such a good series. I would highly recommend it. If you are a Throne of Glass lover, if you love Throne of Glass, I like highly recommend this book, because I think the reason I love Throne of Glass, at least, is because of like how deeply I loved the characters of Throne of Glass, and also like how interesting and complex the villains of Throne of Glass are. And I think ACOTAR does it just as well, if not better, than Sarah J. Maas in the series. It's so good. Okay. Number 2. Number 2 is a contemporary fantasy, romantasy, if you will. It's A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This series is like a little bit older. I think it came out in like 2015, maybe, so like 10 years ago. And it is Twilight for adults. To be honest, that's what it is. We're following this historian witch named Diana Bishop, and she doesn't love that she's a witch. Like, she's a witch by like birth, but like she's not really into using her magic. But she kind of gets like really like chucked into the middle of things when she accidentally finds this magical manuscript that everyone has been looking for. The first book kind of starts at Oxford, and I like 2 years ago went to England with my mother, and I made us go to Oxford. I said, we have to go to Oxford. We have to get there early so we can get the tour that includes the trip to do Humphrey's library, because I need to see where Diana Bishop found this book. And we went, and it was magical. I had a brilliant time. Oxford was amazing, but I went because of this book because I love this book so much. Anyway, she winds up with this like whole thing that's happening with the magical manuscript. She winds up getting entangled with this vampire named Matthew Claremont, and vampires and witches cannot be together. It's illegal. It's not allowed. It would draw too much attention to them. And so there's like the council is like against their romance that is blooming, and Diana doesn't want to like turn to her magical side because her parents died or something. I don't remember. I do remember. I'm lying to you. I remember every detail of this book. It is so good. It is so good. It's Twilight for adults, and I say that with only love. With every ounce of love in my heart. Everything good in my heart. I mean that with not a single smidge of derision towards either of those works. It's brilliant. The second one is sort of historical fiction. They do some time traveling. Ugh, even better. I also haven't read the latest book in this series because I've heard less amazing things about that one. I've heard like mixed reviews on Blackbird or Oracle, which is the most recent release in this series, and I'm scared. I'm scared to read it. But the original trilogy, the All Souls books, are like, it's a complete trilogy. You don't need to continue with companion books, but I would like highly recommend it if you loved Twilight, if you love like a vampire romance, if you love like a smart girl, because she like Diana is a professor, like she's brilliant. I think you'd like the series. She's also a little bit older. I think she's like in her mid-30s, which we love. She's not even 17. Okay. It's so good. Oh, it's so good. Again, if you didn't like it, don't tell me. That's not my business. That's your business. You can think that thought in your head. But this comment section is like my house. Don't come over to my house and insult my favorite things. My absolute favorite fantasy series will come as a surprise to no one who has spent more than 5 seconds looking on my channel, being here. And that is my favorite series. My favorite fantasy series. Honestly, my favorite series in the whole wide world. The series that I think about every single day is no other than Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This book This book, this series has my whole heart. Has my whole heart. There's not a day that goes by that I do not think about Aelin or Sam or Manon or Lysandra. I think about the girlies, or Irene. I think about the girlies all the time. I think about the boys less, but I think about the girlies all the time. I love them so much. I deeply, deeply love this world. Initially, the initial premise of Throne of Glass is we're following Selena Sarthothian, who is Ardalane's assassin. She's like the most notorious assassin that ever has been, and she spent the last year in jail because she got sent to jail. I don't think we know why she got sent to jail initially. And she gets pulled out by the prince and the captain of the guard, Cale and Dorian, who she will enter into a love triangle with. And they're like, hey, do you want to leave jail and come enter into this competition? And if you win, you'll have to be the king's champion, which means essentially his like personal hired assassin. But if you win the competition, you'll also be free. You won't have to be in the salt mines anymore. And she goes, okay, deal. I'll do it. And that's where the book begins. It expands so much from there. Obviously magic and stuff happens. We're just like swept into a much larger narrative that is like a story that is for like the soul of the continent to some extent. And it is just like so beautiful and stunning. The characters are just like, I love them like they're real people. And I really think in this story we have like pretty complex villains that are really interesting, and just it's my beloved. It's my favorite series. I love it so much. There are my top 10 fantasy series. Like I said, if you want me to do a video where I tell you my favorite standalones, I would be happy to do it. I do have standalone favorite romance fantasies as well. If you want to jump on board the old subscribe button, we will be starting an ACOTAR recap in the next couple weeks. I've started working on it, taking notes, tipping and tapping about what Feyre and Tamlin are up to, and I'm really looking forward to doing that. If you have read Throne of Glass and you want to relive the series, I have like 40 hours of content talking about it. What a great time. I think that's all for today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. This was supposed to be like my February wrap-up video, but I read 3 books in February and DNF 4. And as a girly who doesn't talk negatively, I don't normally talk about my DNFs, but like it was a rough month. So much so that last night I had a dream that I read and enjoyed a book. Like my subconscious is like, we gotta be reading something we like. Anyway, so this is what I came up with. Oh, things are rough over here. I'm hoping they turn up in March, because otherwise it's gonna be like a bad booktube year if I'm only reading 3 books a month. They're gonna fire me. I'm gonna lose my job. This is not my job. Me and the 200 views on this video, unfortunately, don't pay the bills.